In the early 20th century, America stood on a precarious precipice. The economy was crawling, yet the working class bore the weight of financial despair. High unemployment rates gnawed at communities, while workers toiled for meager wages. In this time, a harsh reality gripped many. They were working harder than ever, but barely scraping by. Lawrence, Massachusetts became a flashpoint. The textile mills that loomed over the city employed thousands, mostly immigrants seeking a better life. However, their dreams quickly turned grim inside the factory walls. Conditions were brutal. Long hours stretched into torturous shifts. Dust-coated floors provided no refuge from the noise and chaos of the machinery. Workers labored without adequate ventilation, often amidst dangerous equipment that claimed limbs and lives. If illness struck, and it often did, there was little hope for recovery, with no safety net to catch them. And then came January 1912. Without warning, the mill owners dropped a bombshell, a wage cut. It was a devastating blow for families already scraping for essentials. Just a few cents might seem trivial to some, but for the workers of Lawrence, it could mean the difference between a meal and hunger, between shelter and the streets. Anger ignited, with whispers of dissent swirling among the workers, gaining momentum with each passing day. By February, the whispers transformed into a roar. A coalition of workers gathered, driven by a shared desperation. They would stand united. Leaders emerged from the crowd. Figures like the outspoken Joseph Ettor and the fierce Elizabeth Gurley Flynn championed the cause. Together, they recognized that their collective voices could challenge the greed and betrayal embodied in the actions of the mill owners. The embers of revolution were stoked as the call for justice quickened hearts and minds. As March dawned, plans for a strike solidified, gathering energy like an approaching storm. Workers poured into the streets of Lawrence, rallying around banners that proclaimed "Bread and Roses." This was more than a demand for wages, it was a cry for dignity. They were not merely seeking sustenance, but the respect that had eluded them for too long. By the time the strike officially began on January 12, 1912, thousands left the factories. Shouts echoed in the air. Newcomers joined the throngs daily, swelling the ranks of the protest. The world was watching, and the stakes could not have been higher. But the mill owners were not shrinking violets. They called in police reinforcements and hired private security to quell the uprisings. This volatile mix of passion and burgeoning violence reached a boiling point. Strikers filled the streets, some marching, others simply standing defiantly against the oppressive force looming before them. Tension crackled like electricity. Each confrontation between the workers and law enforcement could tip the precarious balance of power. What seemed like a simple wage dispute was spiraling into a battle for human rights. Would the cries for justice drown in the noise of violence and greed? As the first clashes erupted, the question lingering in the air became undeniable. Would this growing movement lead to victory or tragedy? The answer lay in the unfolding chaos of the Bread and Roses strike, where desperation faced the full force of institutional power. What would happen next would change the course of labor history forever. As winter settled over Lawrence, Massachusetts, a powerful force was gathering. A wave of discontent rolled through the mills, igniting a revolution. The Industrial Workers of the World, or IWW, rose as a voice for the voiceless. Founded under the principle of organizing all workers, the IWW's influence swelled. They were now the backbone of the strike. In the heart of this turmoil, the workers came together, a tapestry of immigrant laborers. Italians, Poles, Greeks, and Syrians joined voices, chanting together for dignity and justice. Women played a pivotal role, not just as workers but as the heart of their communities. Mothers and young girls, barely past childhood, stood tall beside their fathers and brothers. These women, defying expectations, emerged as leaders. They had children to feed, they demanded respect. The children, some as young as 6, often worked alongside their parents in the mills. In a quest for survival, families would risk everything to keep food on the table. How many times had the sound of whirring machines drowned out the laughter of childhood? But now, the cries for justice pierced through that din. Bread and Roses became the battle cry. But why that phrase? Bread spoke to the essential need for fair wages, money that could feed families. Roses represented more than luxury. They symbolized dignity and a quality of life worth fighting for. It was a holistic demand: sustenance and respect, survival and compassion. Workers weren't just asking for a paycheck, they sought a life free from degradation. The strike swelled to 25,000 participants. Entire neighborhoods transformed into boiling cauldrons of activism. As thousands flooded the streets, the energy crackled like electricity. Strikers rallied in parks and along picket lines. Songs rang out, defiance draping over them like a cloak. The success of their unity sparked hope, but it also stoked the fires of greed and betrayal among the mill owners. Facing pressure, mill owners resorted to drastic measures. They hired strikebreakers, often armed men intending to break the spirit of the strikers. The atmosphere quickly became charged. Police presence increased, eager to silence the unwavering demands of the workers. Scuffles erupted, but the resolve of those protesters only grew stronger. In the face of brutality, the IWW leaders, like Joseph Ettor and Elizabeth Gurley Flynn, organized strategies and called for sustained resistance. They stood before crowds, unyielding, instilling courage in the hearts of weary laborers. Still, uncertainty loomed. A cold wind blew through the streets of Lawrence as tensions escalated. The potential for a violent confrontation was looming large on the horizon. Workers stood firm, but facing an adversary driven by greed, would their courage be enough? With each passing day, the stakes grew higher. The mill owners, cornered, prepared to retaliate. How far would they go to protect their interests? The cries for bread and roses transformed into a rallying cry for survival, but the response from the other side was about to change everything. Would the brave actions of these workers turn the tide in their favor, or would they face a reckoning that could shatter their hopes? In January 1912, the city of Lawrence erupted. Thousands of workers stormed out of the mills, defying intimidation to demand what they deserved: fair wages and dignity. The atmosphere crackled with unresolved tension as families, laborers, women, and children transformed the streets into a battleground for their rights. The rallying cry of bread and roses echoed louder with each passing day, symbolizing not just a struggle for sustenance, but a fight for a life worth living. Mill owners, sensing the growing momentum of the strike, scrambled to crush the budding movement. Their response was swift and brutal. Local authorities, aligned with the wealthy elite, unleashed the police force upon these peaceful protesters. In the bitter cold of winter, violence erupted. Clubs swung, fists flew, and tear gas filled the air. Confusion turned to chaos as strikers fought back against the onslaught, their collective resolve crystallizing in the face of adversity. As the confrontations escalated, the strikers received unexpected support. The Socialist Party rallied behind them, sending in seasoned organizers to bolster their ranks. Women's suffrage groups, inspired by the courage of the strikers, lent their voices and resources. They understood the stakes. This fight intertwined with the broader struggle for equality. Solidarity flourished among those fighting against oppression. It represented a united front against not just economic injustice, but a patriarchal society that silenced them. The streets of Lawrence filled with banners and voices demanding dignity. Men, women, and children wove together a tapestry of resistance, standing firm against the looming threats of police brutality and mill owner greed. This movement, however, was about more than just bread. It was about the roses, the right to a better quality of life, the right to be respected as human beings. During one particularly intense clash, rumors spread like wildfire. Fearful of escalation, local authorities concocted a plan to send in additional forces. Their strategy? To intimidate and dismantle this audacious uprising quickly, but every action has its reactions. The strikers, galvanized by the violence, intensified their solidarity. They saw allies in every corner, breathing new life into their fight. On the front lines, women played pivotal roles. They organized community kitchens, sustaining strikers and their families, while simultaneously using their collective voice to demand change. Children were not merely passive observers. They became integral to the protests, reminding everyone of the future they were fighting for. A future where dignity and respect weren't mere fantasies. But as the strike progressed into its second month, the line between ally and adversary blurred. Local government officials ramped up pressure while the mill owners launched an all-out assault on the strike's momentum. The stakes were higher than ever. If the strike faltered, years of struggle and sacrifice could collapse in an instant. Then came a moment that would define the struggle. As the strikers prepared for yet another day of protest, news reached them. A new batch of strikebreakers was arriving in town, backed by the authorities. Tensions surged, fear mingled with defiance, and a clear question hung in the air. Were the strikers ready to face the violence head-on, risking everything for their cause? With the confrontation looming, would the strike hold firm against overwhelming odds, or would betrayal and greed snuff out the spark of their movement? The fate of the Bread and Roses strike teetered on the edge of a knife, and the world would soon know if they could survive the storm. The resolution of the Bread and Roses strike came in March 1912, a pivotal moment for labor rights in America. After months of struggle, the workers achieved significant victories. Mill owners, pressured by public outcry and the relentless determination of strikers, agreed to wage increases and improved working conditions. The strike proved that collective bargaining could lead to tangible change. As workers streamed back into the mills, sweat-drenched tees and sunburned faces marking the strain of their fight, they carried with them a newfound solidarity. The strike united not just the Irish, Polish, and immigrant workers in Lawrence, but also sparked a broader awareness of labor issues across the nation. The success in Lawrence resonated beyond its borders. It served as a clarion call to workers everywhere. Standing together against oppression could yield results. However, the victory was bittersweet. While many received wage increases and shorter workdays, the mills of Lawrence quickly adapted. Some factory owners began seeking out ways to circumvent the gains made by the strikers. They hired non-union workers and implemented policies designed to undermine the solidarity the strikers had forged. Greed reared its ugly head once more, threatening to overshadow the progress achieved. But the legacy of the Bread and Roses strike extended far beyond Lawrence. The events in this Massachusetts mill town became a beacon for labor movements across the United States. They inspired the establishment of labor organizations and ignited a fire in the hearts of workers who felt the weight of exploitation. The call for Bread and Roses transformed into a rallying cry. It symbolized the fight not only for wages, but for dignity and respect in the workplace. Government intervention during the strike also played a critical role. The state recognized the unrest and understood the potential ramifications if workers continued to push back. Politicians and labor leaders began to engage in dialogue, leading to concessions that had previously seemed impossible. The idea that the government could intervene to protect workers' rights gained traction and ultimately influenced future labor laws. Yet, as the dust settled from the strike, many wondered if the changes would hold. Would the momentum generated by the strikers pave the way for sustainable reform? Or would the system once again calcify in the wake of newfound complacency? Voices echoed throughout the factories, mingling anxiety with hope. In the years that followed, the Bread and Roses strike catalyzed a broader labor movement. The tactics and strategies employed in Lawrence set a precedent that would be echoed in strikes across the country. Unions flourished, and workers found their voices through collective actions, inching toward rights that had previously been denied. But amid all this progress, an unsettling question remained. Was true equality in the workplace ever achievable, or were the victories merely illusions against the backdrop of an unyielding capitalist landscape? As workers rallied and united, tensions bubbled just below the surface, hinting at the challenges still to come. What would become of the labor movement as America marched toward the tumult of the 20th century? Would the spirit of Bread and Roses continue to inspire new generations, or would it fade into the annals of history as just another chapter in the struggle for workers' rights?